Welcome back to Following Know It On, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 61, and we're doing chapters 21 through 25 of Oathbringer. I almost said Words of Radiance. Oathbringer. And this is the third book of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Got some Shallan content. Got a lot of Shallan content this week, actually. And a Kaladin chapter to keep up with our Parshmen that have awakened, and a Dalinar present day chapter that we will be discussing. Eliot, we'll start with you. How are you?
I'm good. There's some big chapters here. This was some really interesting stuff. This is maybe the hook of the book, perhaps, but we'll see where it goes after this. But this was maybe some of the first chapters where, and put it down. I had to keep flipping the chapter, maybe stayed up a little later than I should on a few nights reading. So this was some exciting stuff.
Glad to hear it. Paul?
I'm glad to be back. I hope everyone here is ready to watch, another week of me powering through this story while Trevor tries to lead me astray. But I'm ready. I'm here. I'm well rested, so I can combat any of his nonsense. So, ready to get going.
Sounds good. For the record, I do try to guide you more than I try to lead you astray, but there is a fair share of leading you astray. I will not lie, but just for the record, I'm more helpful than I am hurtful.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Do we have 2 words to summarize this episode 61? We'll start with Eliot.
My 2 words for this set of intriguing chapters are perspective and slimy.
Perspective and slimy. I know what.
Slimy.
I think I know what both of those are a reference to, actually.
Slimy.
Paul?
My 2 words this week are dormant and inverses. Like in the plural of inverse. Yeah,
okay.
Inverses.
Dormant and
it could just be inverse. Like that would also
inverse.
work. There's no significance with it being plural. Yeah.
All right. Let's use these 4 words and talk about Oathbringer. Eliot, go ahead with your word.
Slimy, yes. I picked slimy because the creature thing, whatever we meet at the end of chapter 25, which I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about, left me with a very slimy sensation. It seemed very creepy, very oozy, very what the heck is this? But I also picked slimy for a character we've met before, who we're meeting again, and that's Mraize. And I'll talk more about it when we get to him. But he had a comment or a quote that moved him pretty solidly from "I'm not so sure about this guy, he seems bad" to "Okay, yep, he's slimy."
Okay. Paul? Oh, wait. Second word for Eliot. I'm getting ahead of
Yes,
myself.
sorry, I do have a second word. Second word was perspective. I picked perspective because I think a few of our characters are going through a bit of a perspective change in some of these chapters, and then also the story that Shallan tells in chapter 25, the play, is kind of at the end of it. The moral of it, perhaps, if you will, seemed to be a little bit about perspective. The people who, I'm sure we'll talk more about it later, but the people who look at this wall that's holding out the darkness on the other side, they think the wall is there to protect them. But in reality, when the girl gets to the top of it, she realizes it's the opposite, that it's the wall is to protect the outside world from them. And so this flip of perspective, and a couple of other characters as well too, but I'll touch on it when we go through the chapters.
Sounds good. Paul?
For my 2 words this week, first of which is dormant. For dormant, I'm mostly referring to Taravangian. You can look at it with some of our other characters as well, but I feel like there's a great problem or power or just force to be reckoned with in general that's lying dormant right now. And I think we know behind the curtain a little bit more about Taravangian, and everything we see here. He's definitely on one of his not so bright days, as far as we can tell.
I'm
And
really glad you said that second part, but keep going.
Yes. And so there's got to be it's safe to say that there's going to be a lot more to that. So I'm going to just say this is a problem that's kind of right in the middle of everyone right now. That's just kind of laying low. Nothing's happening right now, but it's definitely going to explode at one point. So dormant is mostly for that. And inverse is my other word. And it's mostly off the topic of, we have seen our examples. We even talked about this some in our previous episode. We've seen examples of good things. There's Knights Radiant, Shard Blades, Spren, all this stuff. And I feel like we're starting to see these kind of evil versions, or kind of like an inverse of these. I'm partly referring to our voidspren. I have a theory which I'll get to. I'm actually really excited about our little oozy man, our little slimy guy at the end. Just stuff like that, where I feel like we're starting to see the opposites of our good forces of nature, if you will. So yeah, that was my reasoning behind those words.
Sounds good. I do want to touch. No, actually, I'll save it. We have a spell check. We have a new character has been introduced to us. A Dustbringer, as she is introduced, which that information is given to you by Taravangian, so take that with a grain of salt. But she's introduced to you as a Dustbringer. Eliot, would you like to say her name?
Yes, I will try. I think I'm going to likely err in the area of emphasis on this word. The sound seems straightforward. How to emphasize it, I have no idea. So I think I'll try with Malata as the pronunciation.
Okay.
The way that I heard it in the audiobook, I believe, Trevor corrects me, is Malata.
Yes.
Malata.
Color Malata.
Yes, Malata, our Dustbringer. And for spelling Malata, I went pretty straightforward. I didn't try anything fancy. But I went with Malata.
That is correct. You are...
Man, this kid's spot on over here.
I'm 3 in a row.
Yeah, counting last week and this week, yeah.
They aren't our hardest words, but we are getting there. So
Paul, I'll make this promise to you now. If we ever have some horn eaters coming into the story in the future, those will be on the spell check, I promise.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's okay though, because I am a master of horn eater names now. So I've already done 2 of them, so I've definitely got it under control. So that'll be great.
Sounds good.
I believe in you.
All right. We can kind of talk about chapter 21 and 22 together-ish. 21 is, correct me if I'm wrong, but 21 is a scene where Adolin walks in to Shallan's room, and Shallan's just getting over her crazy night of being Vale and chugging all sorts of different alcohols, as we talked about last week. And Adolin is more impressed than anything with her night gallivanting and talking to all sorts of ruffians and stuff in the tavern, because Shallan quickly reminds him, like, he's concerned a little bit, but Shallan quickly reminds him, like, I could get stabbed straight through the chest and I'm pretty sure I'd be totally fine. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. So
At the same time, I gotta say, Adolin should be way more concerned here.
I agree.
Way more concerned. He comes in clearly. She has just gotten completely wasted. She has a bottle of what everyone knows is dangerous moonshine that she's clearly drank the whole thing. And regardless of like her physical safety, I feel like if I was Adolin, I'd be incredibly worried about her, emotional and mental state.
Right.
If she's, if like I'd be walking in like, is this a normal thing for you? Do you go off and do this regularly? Like, yeah, he just doesn't even it doesn't even phase him.
That's true. That's something I didn't actually think of. Elliot, you make a great point of, Adolin can think a little realistically, like, okay, she is a knight radiant. She's not going to die by some normal means, if someone tries to fight her, right? But is it the right thing for her to just keep making these huge scenes all the time and putting her body through all that grief and pain? Like, it's definitely not a good strategy to keep up, right? So, yeah, maybe I should talk about it.
And maybe Adolin likes to go and have crazy drinking nights with his buddies too. So maybe this isn't out of the realm of normal for him, perhaps. But yeah,
It's definitely
I'd be a
different.
little more concerned. I'd be more concerned than Adolin is right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I would chalk this up to a normal drinking night whenever she's stabbing other
Right.
horn eaters through the hand and, all the craziness that she did.
Speaking of giving things more consideration, which is, I totally agree, Adolin should be giving, like, maybe weighing his relationship with Shallan more than he actually is right now. But Shallan, this is just a part of like how it's written in the book. Shallan has an interesting point, and then she kind of just glosses over it. When Shallan talks to Adolin, and she's like, "Oh man, if only you had some Stormlight," and he pulls out a sphere, and she thinks to herself, "Wait, it's been weeks since the last high storm, and this sphere should have gone done by now." And then we kind of just move on. Like, did you guys catch this? What Shallan thinks to herself, like, man, even this sphere should be way done by now. Why is this still infused? And then we just move on. Like, there isn't really any explanation for that. She doesn't ask, like, hey, has this been like specially kept or something? Or what are the rules here? She doesn't ask or anything. She's like, oh, okay, whatever.
I did note that, and I put a big question mark next to it in my notes because I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be a hint towards something or if it was not that important. But that did strike me as strange. Where did Adolin get this sphere from? I think he said specifically that he got it from Dalinar, and so yeah, does Dalinar have a secret stash of Stormlight somewhere or does his relationship with the Stormfather somehow allow him to like get direct infusion from the Stormfather? I don't know if I'm supposed to be thinking about this or not, but I did note this as like in my notes.
Just so I have this straight, also, so wasn't the night before that Shallan was doing all this stuff, and she had lit spheres, right? Wouldn't it be like all these spheres are
Yes.
done, or is it like this night it was supposed to roll? I feel like that doesn't make that much sense because the night before she had a bunch of infused spheres she was taking in breath from.
She's not
taking in light from.
Yeah, she's not specifically thinking about the sphere that Adolin's giving her. She's just thinking in general, like, wait, shouldn't all of our spheres be done by now because of the time frame here? So
Did the Everstorm kind of like supercharge our spheres?
does time run differently in Urithiru? Does Urithiru keep spheres infused?
Yes,
All,
you're right.
clearly. All interesting questions. All from, in classic Brandon Sanderson style, all from one just offhand, one-liner that Shalon doesn't even pause on it. Oh, shouldn't all this spheres have run out? We have to spin off all these questions off of one just offhand comment.
Yeah. As a first-time reader, I definitely picked that up because coming out of Words of Radiance, or actually even way back in the Way of Kings, when you're beginning to learn about Stormlight and the High Storm and how Stormlight works, I always thought that, okay, Brandon Sanderson's setting up a really interesting limitation to his magic system here of, so the Weeping is going to be the Knights Radiance, weak spot, where the Knights Radiant are super powerful, and then when the Weeping happens, that's when trouble's going to strike. And that does happen. He just doesn't really use it to in his story. Like back in Words of Radiance, yes, the Weeping happened, but he didn't really use it as a device to limit Kaladin. He kind of just and there's a High Storm, so Kaladin's fine. But at this point, we don't have High Storms, or at least there's High Storm coming in the next chapter. Spoilers. And we've gone through this whole thing, and our Knights Radiant haven't really been limited, besides limiting the Oathgate usage. That's really been our only mention of it. So I don't know. I always thought that was an interesting thing, of that he sets up a really cool limitation for his Knights Radiant, and he hasn't really used it yet.
But it does lead us to the interesting question of, do the rules work differently in Urithiru? Is it something about the location that's affecting this, or is it something different? That's kind of my question out of that. Another thing I wanted to talk about in this chapter, as Adolin and Shalon are talking, or as they move on and they start to go over to visit Eli, Adolin actually gives Shalon a little bit of a lesson in leadership, which I thought was great. And go and they pick up Shalon's guards, the mercenaries that Shalon, kind of picked up and said, hey, you're going to be good people. And so far they've been good people. They seem to have served Shalon really well. And Adolin's like, well, what have you have them been doing this whole time? And Shalon says, nothing. And Adolin kind of scolds her for that, and points out, hey, you can't do that. You have to give men honorable tasks to do, otherwise they'll get bored or not care. They need to have something productive to do, and that's super true, and a really good little leadership moment there from Adolin of all people, which I thought was kind of cool. And Shalon even kind of notes oh, you're starting to sound like your father here, which it was a cool little moment. I liked it.
I do want to stop on this as well, because I think this is really cool writing. This is really, it shows the strength of Brandon Sanderson's writing. I'll say it that way. It brings to life Adolin as a character, because you could hear it in a dialogue of, this is clearly a lesson that Dalinar has given Adolin, and Adolin is reciprocating it as, oh, this is truth because Dalinar said it, and it is true that you need to give men tasks, but the whole way he approaches it is oh, well, this is a bodyguard thing, and it's not really about them protecting you, it's about giving them something to do. And as this is presented, you could totally see a conversation of Dalinar giving Adolin a lesson on this specific thing. And so I just think it's really cool that through this, it brings the characters to life more, because it makes you think of a conversation that hasn't happened on the page or on screen or whatever you want to say there. But the way it's set up, this conversation definitely happened. So
Yeah, I agree.
I am really curious to hear Elliot's thoughts. Moving forward just a little bit, um, kind of at the beginning of our next chapter, 22, still with Shalon, we see Mraize again, and we see this meeting between Adolin and Shalon, and Mraize and Eli.
ELA.
Yes, Ela. Which I also just realized is a perfect palindrome, but
It is. It's
not.
blasphemous, as they
True.
say.
I was also just, this isn't too important, but I think it's funny that this perfect palindrome is next to Mraize, because I think Mraize may be one of our least even trying to be a palindrome names that we've ever seen. So it just gives me bad boy energy, you know. Mraize. He just doesn't, he's not even trying like our other characters are sort of close. I'm curious to hear a little bit. So I'm in almost a boat that we, in contrast to our first book, I feel like we have too many villains almost right now. There are too many things on the horizon. This isn't a bad thing, but it's just like, what do I think? What do I worry about? Who's gonna actually become a relevant bad guy first? I wanted to start writing it down, but I didn't really get to it. Just like who our bad guys are. I'm gonna go and put like Mraize and Ela on there as just antagonists in general. We've got our, they're not that relevant right now, but I'm gonna go and throw them in there, like the Sleepless, right? Our Mr. Kremling Man.
Okay.
We've got the Voidbringers. We've got these
Odium.
Yes, we've got Odium. We've got these like, what are they? I forget what they're called. The Unmade. We've got the Unmade. We've got our new little voidspren. Maybe it's in the same category there. The Ghostbloods as a whole, that's probably connected to Mraize.
You're missing a big one.
Our little floppy man at the end. Ever.
Well,
But
Zeth
Teravangian.
and,
Zeth, Teravangian.
Okay, you're missing another big one.
Our other evil herald, Skybreaker gang.
Who's our? All right, who's Kaladin's biggest villain?
just
Amaram.
Amaram. He's kind of coming back on the scene a little bit here.
Do you remember? Because Amaram knows more than we've gotten hints, but Amaram definitely is more involved than we know.
He had all those charts and stuff like that. We've got, it could be a very small detail, it could be not important, but we've got our murder mystery at the moment. Needless to say that there's just a lot of bad stuff going on, and I don't even know what to think about at this point. And I'm curious to ask you, Elliot, I guess, like, just reading this, do you think Mraize is actually like a big worry? Like, is he kind of one of our lesser villains that maybe thwarted this part or next part of the book, or is he going to become a big major antagonist? Because I feel like they can't all be this big antagonist, right? They can't all be and stuff. Also, one I forgot to mention was our big spindly leg guy in the High Storm. Those big beasts. So, anyways,
okay, it's a really good question, and I'm with you, Paul. You know, we just easily named off a dozen people or entities that could be, or are in the category of villain. And how do we sort between, okay, who are we fighting against and who are just like the obnoxious side villains of the, okay, they're not on the side of our protagonist, but they're not the big, who we're necessarily fighting against. Yeah, tough to categorize. I think my answer to your question about Mraize changes based on this chapter. And when I say this chapter, I mean chapter 22. Prior to this, I would have said Mraize is a powerful figure in the Ghost Bloods who are just out to, be important people in the world. They want to be shaping the events of Roshar. They happen to do it in rather callous ways. They're going to go and assassinate Yasna without thinking too much about that. They clearly use evil methods, but I wasn't ready to quite categorize them as, they're out for the destruction of everything good yet. But then Mraize says something in this chapter. I'll go ahead and just read it. He says this: morality is an axis that doesn't interest us. Only loyalty and power are relevant, for morality is as ephemeral as the changing weather. It depends upon the angle from which you view it. You will see as you work with us that I am right. And it's kind of a casual reference there to, oh yeah, right or wrong, I don't really care about that. It's just power and influence, and you'll see why. And you could kind of write that off as, okay, he's just out for himself. But the very fact that he writes off morality and clearly says, I don't care about what's right, full stop for me right there, he's now a villain. That puts him in the realm of, oh, if you don't even care what is right and what is wrong, that alone makes you worth opposing as a good guy. If I'm a good guy who cares about what's doing right for the people of Roshar, and you have just stated do whatever it takes because you don't even want to think about what's right or what's wrong, that's kind of the definition of a villain. That's a very common, I think, motive for villains. So I just bumped Mraize up quite a bit on our hierarchy of villains. He's perhaps even above like a Sadius or an Amaram for me. And those folks, we know their motives, but they're not necessarily I'm out to destroy the world. They're just kind of out for themselves so far that we've seen. They're willing to trot on others to get what they want. Mraize is now above that in this could be a master villain type. That's where I'm leaning, if that answers your question.
That does. I'll be honest and say that I'm a little bit surprised. I wasn't thinking him as a real lesser villain, but just I was surprised when you put him above kind of Sadius and Amarim, which I understand your reasoning. That makes a lot of sense. That he is very much like there's nothing like morality doesn't matter.
Yeah, the difference is
Right.
at least Sadius and Amaram think they're doing the right thing, like in their own twisted way.
Yes.
They're motivated in their own way. Mraize explicitly said, "I don't care."
Doesn't care.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Yes, that makes total sense, and I get that. I didn't actually think about that too much. Also, just another clarifying question: was it Mraize who was with? What was his name? Our other bridgeman that kind of went evil a little bit at the end of Words of Radiance.
Moash?
Had tried to assassinate. Yeah, was he the one with Mosh, or was it
No.
the? Okay, I don't know why I was thinking of them as the same. It was what was his name? Bones or something like that.
Bones.
Maybe I'm really off. Just thinking I've said anything. What was the guy's name?
Hold on.
Graves.
Graves.
Graves. Yes.
Bones.
Bones. Graves.
Graves.
Same thing.
Okay, did you actually get there from Graves? Like, is in your mind where you're like, yeah,
It's-
bones are great. Like, was that how you got
I didn't
there?
remember his name, and I thought that's like I was trying to remember the name, and I was like, I think it's Bones. Like I literally thought it was like that was his name, but it was Graves. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyways, I don't know why, but I guess I thought of Graves as being like Mraize. They're very different.
So I've actually
Yeah.
mentioned this before, and I've said this before, that those are two different people, because that's a very common
Mhm.
thing to do, is actually meld those two people together. And I don't know why, but a lot of people do that. So you're not alone, Paul.
Okay. I, I may have been alone in calling him Bones, but
Well,
but at
they're-
least the character getting him mixed up. Yeah.
Their mannerisms are a little similar, and their names sound rather similar, right?
Mhm.
Mraize and Graves. I
Yeah.
totally could see
Brains
it.
and bones. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very similar.
We talked about this though, right? Back when we were meeting him, I think we determined he was not a ghost blood, right? He's
Correct.
got other interesting. Oh, it's Teravangian, right? He ties back to Teravangian.
Correct. He ties to the
Was where we
diagram.
went to.
Is what they
Right.
call themselves, the diagram.
Speaking of which, that's actually funny you mentioned that, because that was about to be a comparison I was going to make. Because we have so many villains, or potentially like big or small, still yet to be determined bad guys, I think a lot of them are going to be way more connected than we're seeing. And one of which is, I think that Mraize is somehow going to be connected with Teravangian, just kind of off of the oh, maybe I'm off on this. I was thinking of Teravangian in the sense of like working towards a goal, but it doesn't matter what you do to get there. Right? Thinking about how he like collects these words that people
Yep.
say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how we've seen Teravangian as a villain. I think I was gonna make that comparison there. So I threw out a really bold prediction that I don't know if that was what I really meant. Whoops. I don't know that Mraize and Teravangian are in cahoots, but I was going to make that comparison there. Because we know Teravangian has a whole lot of stuff, and I would consider him to be one of our major villains. We haven't seen the full extent of it yet, but we know that there's a lot lying dormant there. But yeah, I guess my initial read through, I wasn't thinking of Mraize as that big of a deal. I think of him almost as kind of not like a henchman, but just like a, I don't know, like I almost think of Ela as a more like villainous person. She is like the saddiest, but I think of Mraize as kind of the one she's gonna send to go fight and do the dirty work, I guess, in that sense. As kind of more of a pawn, but on a high scale.
Keep this in the back of your head, though, Paul. Murray specifically says that Ela is not a ghost blood. Just because he's there undercover, like as Ela's like one of Sadeas's guards, that's just his alias, if you will, to get into Urithiru. Is like he's not really associated with Ela. He's just one of her bodyguards to be there as a ghost blood, not working with Ela.
I'm sure that's what the ghost bloods would say, Trevor.
True.
They would be like, no. She's not a ghost blood. I promise. I promise on my ghost blood honor. You know,
yeah,
like
exactly. Yeah, that's true.
I'm poking fun there because I believe you with that. That Ela may not be in on it, but there could definitely there's a lot of devious things going on that I could definitely see them being more interconnected than we're seeing right now. So that's what's going on in my mind, is maybe how are our villains going to come to fruition, or how is that going to be resolved at some point?
And I'm with you, Paul, in that I still have kind of Murray's sort of mentally categorized as like third party, if you will. He's not necessarily actively working against our heroes, so he doesn't, maybe necessarily fit into like an antagonist sort of role yet. But just what we've learned about him here makes me know that I can't trust him. He's that third kind of unknown party who maybe at the end of the day is going to side with the villains, maybe at the end of the day is going to side with the heroes. But if morality is not a motivator for him, if he doesn't care, all he's out for is power, that tells me he's never going to be really on the side of the good guys. That's a simplistic way, I think, that my brain is thinking about it.
The last thing that I will say about Murray's is at kind of the end of the conversation, it made me think that Murray's is more powerful or has more going on than I may have initially thought, in that he knows what Shalon was doing with the whole bar fiasco that happened, and that she used the ghost blood symbol and all that stuff, and just calls her out for that, which was definitely a wake-up call for Shalon, or she's a little confused. I'm a little confused, if not really confused, about that, and how he knows, and maybe how expansive his network or reach is, or his ability to see? Like, how did he know?
He's also dropped some comments that imply quite a bit of knowledge about the Knights Radiant. I know we saw that earlier, where he seems to automatically know quite a bit about Shallan's powers and other powers. Like, I agree. I think this guy might be quite a bit more powerful than we've even seen so far. Maybe.
And that's by design from him, right? Like he drops these one-liners on purpose in front of Shallan to say, like, I know things and you need me because you need to know these things. So I just view him as a bully, really. Like he wants power, and he wants whatever his motives are, and he's going to use whoever and whatever to get it. And so right now it's manipulating one of our Knights Radiant, and like at the end of this conversation he just says her brother's name, like just straight up blackmail, and says, I know things about your brother, so keep working with me and I'll tell you. Like, that's just kind of who he is.
And he gives Shallan an interesting assignment, I guess. And that, again, this seems to be a very powerful, very knowledgeable person, and yet goes to Shallan to say, hey, there's this darkness, just this ominous, not quite sure what he's referring to there, darkness in Urithiru. Hey, can you figure out what that is and get rid of it for us all? Like, I mean, no biggie, you know. I kind of was a little like, wait, you want to do what? Like cleanse this whole tower of darkness? You know, what kind of task is that?
It's an interesting task in the context of our chapter coming up, but
Indeed.
we'll get there shortly. We got to talk about Kaladin briefly. I'm a little sad that we're going to push through this chapter pretty quick. There's not much to talk about here unless you guys have something specific you want to talk about. But I'm a little sad because this chapter is one of my favorites in the early parts of Oathbringer here, because it's very, I don't know what it is about this chapter, but it sits very vivid in my mind of like, I don't know what it is about like Kaladin and Syl, and he's talking to this Waystop guy, but I remember this scene like really, really well. I don't know, it's just one of my favorite scenes. It's very, very nice. I don't know how else to say it.
You like it.
I do.
Nice.
It's just, Kaladin talking to this Waystop guy and about the state of the world. Don't kill my boars because they'll be poaching, that type of thing. Just random stuff. Anyway, important things. Anyone have important things from this chapter?
I think my main takeaways from this chapter was Kaladin's interaction with the yellow spren lady. And we get to see and meet her, which I'm now kind of mentally picturing her as the anti-Syl. She's the opposite of Syl, which that probably is not a very accurate description of what she is at all, but that's just kind of the role she's slotting into in my brain. So now we have like the angel on Kaladin's shoulder, and now the devil or whatever on the other side. But we'll learn more, I'm sure. And we honestly don't learn a whole lot here, other than kind of a description of what she looks like.
I did think the description was kind of interesting. I don't know, there's not really much we can take away from it.
Yeah.
She kind of like, when it says when our yellow spren here walks, it's like a pillar, kind of like a column comes up to like meet her feet with every step, which I
Yeah.
thought was kind of cool. Like, that just sounds cool. And she's described as looking like Shin, like from Shinovar, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't know what to make of that. If we're making our comparison, which we've touched on before, where there's like in the cognitive realm, or where our spren are from in Shadesmar, all that stuff, that there are regions like in Roshar, Like, is she Shin in Shadesmar? Is she from that group? Is there a separate Shin group? Maybe, possibly. Or does she just look like like they could not be related at all? It could not be a real correlation. But I'm curious. I'm also curious to find out, because I feel like we've had a glimpse at some like evil spren before that were described as like spren like red lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very different. This is a yellow ribbon of light. And I'm a little confused. Are there multiple evil spren, which would be make sense? But I just don't know how much evil spren we're talking about. I was kind of guessing that there'd be one type that's like the evil spren. This isn't a real. I don't have anything to go off of this prediction other than I'm really curious. But our new Knight Radiant that's been introduced, Malata, we haven't seen her spren, but I'm kind of curious just knowing that Teravangian, I feel like, is a problem, a much larger problem waiting to happen. That what if she has the same kind of spren, and what if that becomes an issue later if Kaladin comes back and is like, hold on, you have a void spren, like this may be concerning from info we find out. Right, that's very. I'm grasping at straws. That will probably be debunked in the next chapter I read. But it just got my mind, my little wheels turning, and I'm curious to learn about our new spren here, and I'm also very curious to see what spren a Dustbringer has. We have a Dustbringer on the scene now, which apparently they don't like to be called Dustbringers. The spren do, which reminded me of our Cryptics.
Yep.
With Shallan. So I don't know if anyone can take it away. I kind of just went on and didn't really leave out a question or anything, but
no, you're fine. My main takeaway from this, especially as a first time reader, was what the Sprens tells Kaladin, and Kaladin's clarifying questions here. If you want to fight for us, we would certainly take you. And that surprised me as a reader, of like, oh, well, I guess the spren behind waking up of the Parshmen don't care what race you are. If you want to work for them, then they're certainly open to that. Now, obviously they wouldn't take him if they saw him glowing with Stormlight. Or would they?
That's a rabbit trail,
I'm
Trevor.
wondering...
I'm cutting you off here. I'm cutting you off.
The red herring right there. The path or the bait we're not supposed to take.
Because he hasn't really sucked in any Stormlight or anything. I don't think. I'm pretty convinced no one has seen. We do see just with his conversation with our void spren here. She is kind of like, congratulations on fooling the Parshmen. They're like very young. She's like, I'm more than a couple months old, and is very like ambiguous and like, I know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So our spren probably knows or may know.
I think we can imply a few things from this, though. If we can take what the spren is saying at face value, I think it does, because if they would be willing to take on a human or a Lethi, however you want to categorize Kaladin, into their army, that does tell us that their ultimate goal is not something like get all these Parshmen to level up and achieve like Parshendi storm form. Like, if that's the goal, is to awaken all the Parshmen, get them into storm form so we can conquer the world, Kaladin doesn't really fit into that. Like, here's a random human. He can't do that. So you could perhaps jump to the conclusion that that's not the motive. But if they're just looking for any and all soldiers they can find, we still seem to be in the motive of destruction. Like they want an army.
Right.
You could make guess that, okay, if they're looking for soldiers, they're bringing these Parshmen in to become soldiers. The only reason you need a whole bunch of soldiers is if you're going to attack somebody or defend yourself from somebody, I suppose. But I guess that's a few thoughts we can maybe try to jump to from the little bit of information this spren gives here.
Yeah, if you want to take that to the extreme, if the storm spren or whatever, if their motive is complete Parshman domination, human extinction, like if that's their motive, why is she just not killing Kaladin on the spot, if she has the ability or whatever? So it's probably not that drastic, because she's willing to work with Kaladin here. So
but that's of course all assuming that this spren is even telling the truth and speaking honestly here. It could also have much more devious motives here and be trying to manipulate or trick Kaladin into something. So who knows? Maybe we're making some bad assumptions here. I'm sure we'll find out.